Hi, and welcome to our LinkedIn Live broadcast on the release of the ISM Services PMI Report. I'm Dan Zeiger, Senior Writer and Editor for Inside Supply Management, which is Institute for Supply Management's member publication, and welcome to our discussion as we break down the Services PMI data for March. Month revealed strong but slower growth. Demand signals were mixed while prices took a big leap and the employment index moved into contraction territory. Meanwhile, the Iran war impacted the U.S. services sector as companies paid more, in some cases a lot more, and stocked up to avoid shortages. Through it all, the Services PMI registered 54.1%. That's strong growth by any metric, but it was down 2.1 percentage points compared to February. So as usual, there's a lot to talk about, and let's bring in Steve Miller. He's the chair of the ISM Services Business Survey Committee. How you doing, Steve? And what stood out to you about the March data?
You did a really good summary there, Dan, as usual. The two things that really stood out were the prices and employment. So we saw a big jump in prices. First time we've been up above 70 in a while. Looking back at the seasonally adjusted numbers, it's been several years. Not unexpected that it was up, given the pressure on oil, gas prices, that type of thing. But that was very significant commentary throughout the report, or feedback that we got for the report. Input from both commodities and commodities up in price. We saw fuel, gasoline, diesel, every component there. We haven't seen pricing flow through yet to manufactured products that include petroleum, but there was commentary that said we should expect to see that, or worried about seeing that in the future. And then when you look on the employment side, I'm hoping that was a bit of a bad news reaps bad news kind of thought, that we're much more negative around hiring going forward, just as a individual perspective, not something that's going to flow through to layoffs and that type of thing. But the drop in employment was much more significant than I expected. With uncertainty, you see a reluctance to hire or delays in hiring. What could be the impact of these higher costs? So people will be more cautious, but the number being as low as it is kind of indicates that it's something more substantial. So we'll have to wait and see on that.
Yeah, we'll drill down into some of the more specific index numbers that you kind of summarized there. And yeah, you're right about the commentary. I mentioned this to Sue Spence last week. I know we've had a lot of fun in recent months with some of the comments. They've been biting, or but like in the manufacturing, some of the services comments I just thought were really insightful. And maybe we'll get to talk more in specific one if we have time today. But yeah, the panelists did a really good job. You stated a lot in the report. The panelists talked about it as well, as was the case in manufacturing. Tariffs and the hostilities in the Middle East were top of mind in March. Just discuss how the supply chain implications have changed or maybe intensified since the last time you and I spoke.
Sure. So we're seeing continued disruption in transportation routes, and we're seeing some reduced flight activity, both from a weather as well as a conflict standpoint for the month of March. So that impacts, planes move goods. So when we have reduced tourism, you're going to see reduced flights or flights that are specifically cargo related. So I think that had an impact, and we saw that in the supplier deliveries getting slower, with the number being larger for supplier deliveries. I think the other side is just, I don't want to under or over emphasize tariffs at the moment, because there's still the same uncertainty. But even though there was commentary on tariffs, it was much lower than historically. And I think it's because it's being pushed out by the discussions around the conflict in the Middle East and the comments on that, not because it's any less of a concern. It's just that the higher concern right now is what could we be impacted by, given, I think, jet fuel as of last week was up 40% month over month. Things like that obviously will have a much more significant impact than a 10 to 15% impact for tariffs.
Yeah. Kind of, I said in the introduction, kind of mixed results on the demand results, and not that they all weren't good, but I noted that the new orders index hit 60.6%, which is obviously very good. Anything above 60% is very good. Business activity was at 53.9, backlog of orders 53.6, new export orders 50.7%. Those were all in expansion, for sure, but they all indicated slower growth. You add up those last three indexes, they were down by a combined 14.8 percentage points. Sue noted in the manufacturing report the other day, there was some slower growth, and that was something to keep an eye on. Is that the same way for services? Should we keep an eye on some of those demand indexes that were a little lower this month?
So I hate to say wait and see, but there's certainly a big chunk of that into how long this conflict lasts. And had this as part of a conversation, I think about 6 months ago, in terms of how strong is strong and where are we in terms of resilience. Now, we had a reading of over 56 last month, down to 54 this month. To put that in perspective, 54 is 1.7 points above the 12-month trailing average. We've seen 3 months in a row of growth of the 12-month average. So the strength continues. It's being impacted right now, but I think there's still cause of optimism within the services industry or services sector. The watch out there is just how widespread will the impacts and how long lasting will the impacts be from fuel and fuel cost increases related to the conflict. If we in fact have tomorrow as bridge and power station day, that's been, I think, trivialized to an extent that I think isn't helpful. That could have really far-reaching long-term impact from a cost of oil standpoint. So hopefully things will get resolved both from a humanitarian standpoint as well as a business standpoint, because that type of damage takes a long time to recover from and will impact many millions of people that we would hope wouldn't happen.
Yeah. You had mentioned fuel prices. I guess that's a really good transition to obviously the index that got a lot of attention today. That was the prices index. Began catching up with the manufacturing counterpart in March. It was up 7.7 percentage points to 70.7%. I don't think many observers would say all those sevens were a lucky occurrence, but yeah, the highest reading since October 2022 when it was also 70.7%. And like in manufacturing, there were no commodities reported as down in price. I know we kind of talked about this last month as something to be on the lookout for, so I would imagine this is not a big surprise. But yeah, just talk about how that really developed in March.
Yeah, since, like you said, how long it's been since we've been at 70 and above 70. I expected maybe a 3 or 4 percentage point increase in the index, given that we have energy impacts everybody, but from a energy intensity standpoint across the services sector, I didn't expect that we would see that type of a quick roll in to the number. The thing that makes it a little more concerning even is that some of the commentary was we're concerned about how this will impact costs in the future, not it's impacting us from a cost standpoint now. So we're seeing it flow through to many industries now. Of course, transportation companies for a long time have had fuel surcharges built into their agreements, and many companies have extended that where they have a significant delivery cost or delivery component of their cost of goods or cost of services. They've embedded those types of things within their contracts, whether force majeure applies or not. And then that on top of we're not seeing that flow through yet means that the number is going higher, not lower.
Yeah. Well, yeah. You talked about, I was just looking at one of the comments and I said we'd cite one if we had time, but yeah, we'll get to, since we're talking about prices, this is from a respondent in utilities. and he or she wrote, continued volatility in copper, aluminum, and steel markets driven by supply chain constraints and strong infrastructure demand has increased costs and lead times for electric utility projects. These conditions are influencing purchasing strategies and capital planning across the industry. You talked about some of those strategies and some of those mitigation plans. Anything to add? Anything else companies might be doing to kind of navigate this environment right now?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think I have a little bit more negative to put on top of that. You have interest rates coming down, or they did come down from a Fed rate standpoint, and that was supposed to provide some relief. And now we're seeing the costs go up, which is more than offsetting the financing cost improvements that were being generated by the Fed rate cuts. With prices going up, the Fed is going to be very reluctant to cut rates anymore unless we see continued significant weakness in employment, which I don't expect to see given how big the new orders are and how stable the business activity sub-index is. So we're kind of, again, caught between a rock and a hard place where we want to drive economic activity by having lower interest rates, but given the pressure on inflation, and just as kind of a little alley on this one, and then I'll come back to the main street. Looking back historically, going into the significant inflation rates that we saw before, 50s, then 60s, then hitting 70s, and then 80s, we're seeing a similar progression right now, although the time in the 60s was about twice as long this time than it was last time. But looking ahead 12 months, if we continue to see that kind of price pressure, we'll be seeing interest rates of 7% like we did back then. So big concern how long this cost shock impacts us. But from an economic strength standpoint, though, I still feel very confident that we're in a good place, and barring something really drastic, we should be in a good place here this summer. I'm still thinking that's where we're going to be. Yeah.
Another index that got a lot of attention today was the employment index. It actually went into contraction at 45.2% in March after 3 months of growth. Among the companies surveyed, 10.7% reported increasing staff. That was down from 16.2% previous month, and 18.4% lowered their headcounts, up from 15.1% in February. You noted in the report this was a surprise, especially, being it was around the neighborhood of 51% last month. I know you said in an earlier call, hopeful it's a 1 month blip. Just discuss the environment.
So in the services industry, labor is something that's very easy to tweak if you're uncertain about demand and what's going to happen. And I think you immediately go into crisis management crisis management when you see the kinds of spikes that we're seeing on the fuel cost and oil cost, because you're not really sure how it's going to flow through, what other opportunities you have to mitigate those costs. And so you say, well, let's hold up, let's slow down on hiring a bit. And it doesn't have to be a lot in order for it to show up as a big number for us, because we don't manage the amplitude, we just see the frequency. So if we have big companies saying that they're not cutting at all or they're growing their employment, and we have 4 small companies say they're reducing employment, we're going to see a very, very high, we're going to see a very, very low employment number, because it's frequency, not magnitude, even though the one large company that's growing may be hiring 5 times as many people as those 4 companies or 5 companies that are cutting. So the point that I want to emphasize is that we saw a significant drop. Normal practice when you're in a high degree of uncertainty, that you're going to be cautious around controllable costs, labor is one of those things that you can back off of, just delaying 2 months in hiring. That shows up as we're hiring less this month than we did last month, which leads to a lower number. And I think the bookend on this one, Dan, is that 13 of the companies said that the industries said that they were in expansion territory this month. I believe that's the right number. At any rate, this month and last month were the highest numbers of industries in expansion and the lowest numbers in industries in contraction over the last year. So we're seeing strength. We're seeing an impact. I don't think there's a reason to be pessimistic, but certainly a reason to be cautious.
Yeah. And then there was one more index specifically that, people will talk about. I know you got a question about it earlier today. It was the inventories index. That's, isn't as paid attention to as much as the manufacturing one, but it's obviously still important in the services sector. And in the report, there were some panelist comments to this effect as well, mentioned that companies were stocking up, due to geopolitical developments and probably, maybe trying to get ahead of price increases, just to discuss that dynamic.
Sure. And that's what we saw come through in the commentary, is that people were buying ahead to avoid the flow through of fuel cost and of course petroleum input cost for products that they would be getting. And it's the same as what we saw. I mean, I'm reading it as the same as what we saw during the tariff run up, is that there was concern. We saw import spike. We saw inventories go up, and at the same time we saw inventory sentiment reduce. So we still think we have too much inventory, but less think we have too much inventory than we did last month, which to me indicates this continued expansionary activity within inventory is not a concern. It's a strategy.
Yeah. I know from time to time I like to discuss with you a couple of industry spotlights, and this month is especially interesting, I guess, because I have two industries to ask you about. I'll start with my second question first, actually, since we have been talking about fuel and that dynamic. I mean, transportation and warehousing. We were talking at this month last time how it kind of struggled in February, but it rebounded in March. But yeah, talking about fuel prices obviously going to have a big impact on that industry. I mean, is the trajectory, if the way things keep going, could it kind of threaten that momentum there for transportation and warehousing?
It's certainly a threat, but just to the point that is that transportation cost as a component of my incoming goods and services significant enough to warrant me reducing what I'm buying. And I don't see that as being a key driver of a significant amount. I think we're going to see the revenues certainly increase, gross revenues, not net revenues, increase for transportation companies based on their fuel surcharges that they'll be passing through to their customers. To the extent that fuel surcharges are actually going to meaningfully impact demand, I think that's more of a macro thing than a micro thing. I don't expect that, at least in the short term, we'll see that as a significant barrier to people continuing to do business, because they've got production, they have people on staff. You need to notify people, to give them advance notification if you're doing any significant reduction in force to compensate for cost increases. So that's going to continue to flow, I think, in April as it did in March. And March tends to be a higher the month following Lunar New Year and come back from Lunar New Year, we usually see the dip and then the improvement. So I think on the transportation side, we're not going to see a reduction in demand from their services. Now, how big an individual company is impacted by trade route changes based on the conflict in the Middle East, that's a big wild card for them. If you have a lot of ocean movement, over in the Middle East using the Strait, and now potentially up to the Mediterranean. There's, that for individual companies, and for Europe will be significant. I think the US much less so.
Yeah. And then the other industry I wanted to ask you about, kind of give you an opportunity to educate me, because I don't know a whole lot about it. But management of companies and support services had a very good March. It was number 2 in overall growth among the 18 industries, and it was at or near the top in business activity, new orders, employment, and inventories. Is that kind of an industry that, kind of tends to get higher activity when you have challenging economic circumstances like we do now? And is that a highly exported industry? I know we talk about professional, scientific, and technical services. That's a highly exported services industry. Is that the same for management of companies and support services?
So I don't, not in the companies that I'm aware of in that sector, Dan.
Mm-hmm.
We do see a lot of commentary around exports
Mm-hmm.
from our respondents in that industry within the services sector. You have, say, pest management services, some construction management and engineering services. I would think that they would be negatively impacted, not positively impacted for foreign activity, but just the opposite. So from that standpoint, HR services companies fit into that sector as well. I don't see a direct relationship there. So that's a little bit of a head scratcher for me. That may, Dan, as a result of your question, maybe need to dig into it a little bit more to be able to talk to that more authoritatively at our next LinkedIn Live. Yeah.
All right. I'll make a note of that. But yeah, good month for management of companies and support services. And yes, we'll look for that. Keep an eye on it and see if it continues. Hey, my last chance to promote this before the conference later this month at the ISM annual conference. Steve and Susan Spence, who is the chair of the Manufacturing Business Survey Committee, will host a session on how the ISM PMI reports can help a company's business decisions in areas like forecasting, planning, risk management, and more. ISM World 2026 is April 26th through 28th in Denver. You can get more information at ismworld.org/conference. Check it out. You may want to see a great session, not only with Steve and Susan Spence, but you'll just be around a lot of great people. I know that from experience. So just based on, I know Susan gave maybe a little bit of a teaser of what you and her are going to be talking about. You're certainly invited to do the same, but it's about this topic that this question that I generally ask you. If I'm a CEO or a high executive, what should I take away from this month's data?
So to me, this feels very similar to what we went into coming out of COVID, where we saw a lot of good business activity and we saw prices accelerating. So when you think about the levers that you needed to pull at that point, where you couldn't cut back because you had strong business growth and you wanted to compete and win in the business, but you also saw prices or costs going up. One thing I think that's unquestionable is that these specific prices will come down in the future. The cost of petroleum, the cost of petroleum products, gasoline, fuel are going to go down at some point in the future. Whether you manage those costs out are entirely up to you. So as you see costs flow through, make sure you're capturing those, or your supply management team is capturing them, so that when things ease up, they're able to go back and recover those cost increases in order to return to the same level of profitability we were going into it.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, Steve, those are all the questions that I had. At the end here, I give the sub-indexes table another scan to see if there was anything that we missed that we may need to talk about. I can't see anything, but I'll ask you. Is there anything that we haven't discussed at this point, or anything that I didn't ask that you think might be important to include for our viewers before we wrap up?
I think we covered it, Dan. It was good. One little piece maybe is that we saw imports up and exports up again, second month in a row where we saw both of those up. That doesn't happen when people are terribly pessimistic. So I think that we're seeing trade continue to be strong. We're seeing probably some buy ahead, which is pushing that imports number up a little bit higher. But other than that, I mean, the numbers look good, and pretty optimistic that if we can get the conflict settled, we're in for a good summer and good rest of the year.
Yeah. That new export orders number, as we noted earlier, down a little, but still an expansion at 50.7. Imports actually did go up, as Steve said, 55.2%, up from 51.8% in February. So thanks a lot, Steve. Hey, I'll look forward to seeing you in Denver, and
Sure.
we'll see you back here next month when we break down the data for April. All right. And thank you for joining us today. In a little bit, you can go to ISM's website to read the roundup article that details a lot of what Steve and I have discussed here. And if you want to be a part of the ISM Manufacturing or Services Business Survey panels that help compile data for the ISM PMI reports, go to ismworld.org/join the panel for more information. And we'll see you back here next month when we break down the ISM PMI reports for April. For Steve Miller and good people who helped us behind the scenes today, Christina Cahill and Jennifer Stevens, I'm Dan Zeiger. We'll see you next time.